as one of the four Asian tigers and has been consistently ranked as the world's freest and most competitive economy. The vibrant city of Hong Kong has seized every opportunity by getting industrialized or getting involved in the international trade and financial system and providing a gateway service linking the Chinese mainland with the outside world. And now the city is faced with new opportunities in a new era as the Chinese mainland is ever closely linked to the outside world in economic globalization. What kind of role can Hong Kong play in this regard? This week, The Point travels to Hong Kong to talk to the people who are in the thick of it. And we will bring you 3 special roundtable discussions on Hong Kong's economy. Today, in our first episode called Hong Kong Connects, I'm pleased to be joined by Mr. Robert Kebb, Director for the Economist Corporate Network, by Mr. Andrew Long, an international and independent China strategist, and by Dr. Paul Look, Assistant Professor at the Department of Economics at Hong Kong Baptist University. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, 20 years since Hong Kong's return to China, how has Hong Kong's role as a connector evolved? Is Hong Kong connecting more or less?
Well, in many ways, it's actually more. It's become more Chinese, not only in terms of the political control, which is manifest, and it's also brought about some controversies among certain people, but it is more integrated. It's also more integrated economically, and particularly with the discussion now about the Greater Bay Area, that's going to probably proceed even further. So regardless of the frictions, yes, it's much more integrated.
But what specific areas are we talking about when we say Hong Kong is more economically connected with the Chinese mainland?
Well, I think definitely there is much more connected because it's part of the more globalized world. The whole world becomes much more interdependent and interconnected. But the kind of connection is very, very different because Hong Kong has always been a kind of something different from the mainland, and it connects the mainland with the outside world. Now, I have been with the Hong Kong government for nearly 40 years, and I've seen how that happened. You know, what was the kind of connection before, and what is the kind of connection now is very, very different. First of all, Hong Kong in the old days used to become the entrepot, a kind of international trade before even China opened up. You know, Hong Kong was the port, so a lot of trade passed through Hong Kong.
Yes.
There was a kind of connection as well. But now, the connection is very, very different. Of course, Hong Kong no longer manufactures a great deal. Still, there are goods coming through Hong Kong, but what about the port in Shanghai, in Shekou, and in other areas? In fact, the port of Hong Kong is no longer the top of the world.
Right. I think one point I would like to add is that the role played by Hong Kong depends very much on policy in China. For example, 20 years ago, as Mr. Leung said, Hong Kong played a role as a export and import of goods and services. And the reason is that at that time, China did not have an open current account, right? And the current account in China opened in the year 1996. And after that, there were, of course, China can do its own trading with the rest of the world. However, China still doesn't have an open capital account, and China is still gradually opening. And Hong Kong plays a bigger role in, for example, recently we have a very rapid development in financial services. Right now it employs about 10% of the total population in Hong Kong and creates about 15–16% of GDP in Hong Kong.
So basically that was at the beginning of the handover, right? There was a big advantage in terms of what Hong Kong can offer compared with its mainland counterpart. How about now? I mean, 20 years later, does Hong Kong still have those advantages that you mentioned?
I think so, but the role played by Hong Kong is a little bit different. It used to be, just trading and logistics, right? Right now we have more financial services, professional services like, legal services, accounting, and that kind of services. We are still playing some role.
But the mainland is also catching up on those fronts, right?
But what, to Professor Locke's point, is maybe from my perspective, where I see Hong Kong having still an absolute advantage, it's an open market. Globally.
Yes.
The huge irony of Hong Kong is it has a lot of monopolies, it has a lot of oligopolies and other controlled markets, just like we see in a lot of Asian economies, especially China. But it's open to the world. So having an open capital account in today's economy is massively important. Having open media is also hugely important. Having law that complies with international standards, including the court system as well as the nature of the law, that's a huge advantage for Hong Kong.
Sure, these are the huge advantages. Over the past 20 years, have these advantages been fully exploited for the benefit of Hong Kong?
Yeah, you could argue that different ways, couldn't you? Yeah, maybe not. Maybe it should do
Why?
more with that. Well, I'd be interested in some other opinions as well. I would think it's because there is a huge fear among the administrators in Hong Kong, I believe, to follow what Beijing wants. Now, that's not to put it all on one side or the other, but I think one thing to look forward to maybe as this 20th anniversary comes around is perhaps going forward if there's better communication. Personally, as an outsider, I'll admit it, I, though, often see the frictions going on in Hong Kong. I think if there was just more open dialogue, I have a feeling that often it's implied what the instructions are for the Hong Kong administration to go forward with. And maybe Beijing is also trying to figure out what's really going on in Hong Kong. If there's more openness in communication, it might be better to move forward and seize on those advantages that Hong
Very
Kong has.
interesting topic here. Do you also see the same need for greater communication and coordination?
I think that as the two places become more and more integrated economically, all the contradictions of one country and two systems are coming to the fore, because the one country is, of course, very, very different from the government, from the kind of society Hong Kong has. But the magic of the one country, two system is for Hong Kong to recognize the realities of the one country embedded in the one country, two systems, and yet try to capitalize on the strengths of the two systems. But I think that Hong Kong government is following Beijing's dictates, but in fact the reality is that everything has got to be in compliance with the basic law. Hong Kong's freedom is highly internationally recognized. For example, the Fraser Institution recognizes Hong Kong as the top of the rank in terms of individual freedom, not just the freedom of the economy, which is of course acknowledged by the Heritage Foundation for 22 years in a row. Hong Kong is the freest economy in the world, but individual freedom is also highly recognized according to independent index. So, but how come that there is a perception with high degree in individual freedom that Hong Kong's the kind of the special features of Hong Kong seem to be eroded. But this is part of the reality of the much more closer integration as Chinese tourists are coming to Hong Kong, and this kind of policies which Beijing seems to be, just seeing that threatening the very stability of the one country. So these two contradictions must have to be addressed. And my colleague here was quite right to say that there need to be more open dialogue, there need to be build more trust, and I think the new administration is very much alive to that.
So basically, as the two sides come closer to each other, more integrated, there is this period where they have to become comfortable with each other, build trust, and maybe that has not been done in a most optimal way.
From my perspective, and I spent 10 years in Beijing, so I although I'm a foreigner speaking Chinese and living in the country for a while, I can see a lot from the Chinese perspective as best as one could in my position, and I sympathize a lot with the frustrations that seem to be from the mainland side, and I can also see how, if I were a native Hong Konger, how I would look at the influx of Chinese, whether it's tourists or investment and driving up land prices, how that's all a friction. But there's another gap. Some of those things really can be addressed through just maybe a more proactive communication. There's another type though that's challenging in any society, and it's generational. If you really look at the localist fervor that's going on, it's predominantly among the youth. So that's why you have things like Youngspiration. And you see it really in the high schools and colleges and people associated with universities. I'd be interested in Professor Luck's take on that. But just to say that this is something, particularly in the US, so it happens everywhere, but it takes more than just a typical political dialogue, let's say. It's going to take much more innovative thinking about how can we make young people, in a society, by the way, where the actual wage levels have been going down, because if you adjust that for cost of living, people are not better off in Hong Kong than they were 20 years ago on that basis. The elite are. Those who own property are, but not everybody.
Yeah. What do the young people say on the campus, Dr. Liu?
Well, my students, some of them are, I noticed that some of them are localists. my understand. However, I think that they do not recognize the opportunity provided by one country, two system, and it is a special arrangement. It's special in the sense that. Well, there are a lot of policy reforms in China that are taking places. Some of them are macroeconomic, open macro reform, opening the capital controls. And China always do reform in a gradualist approach. And Hong Kong provides a very good site for experimentation. Right now we have all these stock connect. For example, Hong Kong is the largest offshore renminbi financial center, and these are very logical steps because Hong Kong is part of China. We belong to the same national boundaries. When you do this kind of experiment, you don't want to do it in a financial center in some other country. So Hong Kong provides, it makes these experiments more controllable.
But are the students, I'm curious, do the students see the advantages with this? That seems to be where there's a gap, right? The students don't see the opportunities.
They don't see that.
Yeah.
What's the reason? I'm wondering.
Well, I think that I think a lot of the students, because I talked to the students myself in one university, together with a Democratic Party legislator. It was a lady who was forefront, and then the lady thought that she could sell her party to the students, but without realizing she was surrounded by all the students who criticized her for not being aggressive enough. And query, her style of engagement with the government is not enough. So I talked to the students and say, hey, what do you want? But I understand that their frustrations. For example, as my colleague pointed out, there is seeming losing increasing hope of starting a family. How can they afford to buy the flat? Yeah. And then also, secondly, a lot of the students they don't study China, recent history, so they don't understand China. And then a lot of people have suspicions about China.
Sure. And there are these comparisons, these arguments going on, keep coming up. Some are saying, look, Hong Kong has been supported so much by the mainland in terms of tax. For instance, Hong Kong pays zero tax to the central government. A lot of preferential policies, CEPA, trade, and also people's livelihoods.
We don't have to pay for our defense, for example.
Yeah, you don't have to pay for it.
We had to pay for our defense under the British,
Yeah, and now, and even the vegetables, the fresh water, and all of that, often people seem not to recognize or are aware of that anymore. But there is also the opposite saying, thinking that the mainland has benefited enormously from Hong Kong as a bridge. Should we have this kind of how should you say, seemingly mutually exclusive argument, or really it's both at the same time true?
It reminds me though of a romantic relationship. Because, in a sense, because it's like the male-female dynamic, where typically, I don't want to sound sexist in any way, either side of being sexist, but men tend to be very logical and rational, and women tend to be more in touch with their emotions. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but if you simply approach the people of Hong Kong and say, here's a ledger, we've given you this, we've given you this, we've given you this, why aren't you happy? The women I've had relationships with never like that. And vice versa. If you're just emotional, right? If Beijing's the man in this relationship and Hong Kong's the woman, if you're just emotional, hey, you don't respect me, hey, you don't treat me nice, that doesn't work either. So it's balancing that out. And again, I'm not trying to play into stereotypes, but I think that is how human nature is. And we have men and women's sides in us as individuals and in economies. That's a dynamic flow. So a lot of this, to me, gets down to how can you relate to what a person feels happy about or not happy about. The people of Hong Kong, many are very happy with this relationship, particularly the business elite. Professionals, quite happy. Young people, not so much.
Yes.
I would even, saying something from the expat point of view, I think by and large the expat community has done well, but that has always been a feature of the Hong Kong economy. And expats don't feel as free and as engaged as they were before. Now you could say, well, that's because it was a colony before, and that's an unfair comparison. Maybe, but I think all of that's part of it. And Hong Kong is also notable for not just having expats, but people like people who are ethnically Indian, who are native Hong Kongers. You have a lot of people from the Philippines and Indonesia working as housekeepers and so forth. I mean, all of that's part of this mix.
Yeah.
And you have varying degrees of integration and lack of integration. And I'm just saying, for Hong Kong to really thrive going forward, it's going to have to look very deeply at how its relationship works with the mainland and internally as well.
Yeah. I think it's important not just to talk to each other, because talk is cheap. The more importantly is to actually find projects to engage the young people, so that they are involved in it, not only in Hong Kong, of course, but on the mainland, but also internationally. And I'm referring to, of course, the One Belt One Road. There are lots of projects along the One Belt One Road. A lot of Hong Kong people have very little idea how these projects could relate to Hong Kong, for instance.
Do they have the interest?
Oh,
Are they interested in finding out about it?
I think that there is a beginning to be interest, but then there is a high degree of...
Will they not feel, look, this is a Chinese project?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's why they feel a little bit of uncertain. They think that mainly all these projects are big projects. They're backed by the Chinese government. What's that got to do with us, you see? But in fact, if you look deeply, a lot of these projects could do with the financial services in Hong Kong. They could do with the legal professions in Hong Kong, and even the accounting people. And
of course, the opportunities are enormous.
You
know, yesterday I was reading the newspaper, and Li Gang was making this remark, which I thought was quite interesting. He said, look, I'm the head of the Creative Artists Association, and nobody ever questioned that I would turn Hollywood red. But when I invest in Hong Kong, everybody, you know, points to me saying I'm trying to, you know, make Hong Kong red. So is there a really artificial ideological barrier that has been set up in Hong Kong that's hindering Hong Kong getting more integrated in China's overall development?
As I said, a lot of the young people, they haven't studied history, so you need to engage with them. And then, as suggested by the new chief executive, the coming chief executive, Carrie Lam, you need to educate the young people right from kindergarten, so that they have a national identity. So, and then through the education, there is a sense of history, realizing all the contradictions, the kind of imperfections, perhaps in the one country, but also in Hong Kong, how Hong Kong could capitalize on these two systems. But apart from the education, it's important to engage. For example, on the mainland, apart from business, there could be civil society projects helping the poor, helping the environment, and then Hong Kong's the young people could take part in it. And by taking part in it, they could have gained a deeper understanding of the one country.
Yes. We are going to take a very short break, and you have been watching a special roundtable discussion on Hong Kong called Hong Kong Connects. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back. You're watching a special roundtable discussion of The Point in Hong Kong, and we're discussing Hong Kong's connectivity both in the past and in the future. Dr. Look, are the university students in Hong Kong nowadays interested in projects and national strategies such as the Belt and Road? Are there any communication going on to help them understand this?
My feeling is that, of course, they know that there are these big projects going on, but they do not have a sense of belonging. It's like you have all these big projects. You know that, okay, the financial sector is going to be involved. You have professionals, you know, lawyers, accountants. They are going to be involved, but they don't know how they are themselves are connected with these projects.
How much explanation is going on? Are you just leaving it up to the students to find out about it themselves, or there are kinds of communication program with the special administrative government and the local people to tell people the potential opportunities that are there?
I don't see that much, actually.
You don't see that?
Well, I think that apart from telling them, it's also to make them realize the actual opportunities, in the sense that if they get an internship, for example, they don't have to be responsible for a project, and then opportunities could be offered to them to be an intern in one of the projects. Now, the internship itself, which shows up in their CV, if they want to go to the United States, some of the big the universities, and to the leading universities in Europe, so that helps them as well. So, provided that there are opportunities like internships to engage in them, so that they can see at least, the as to my credentials.
To lower the threshold for them to participate.
Exactly. If I could, one thing is, again, I think there's a lot to Hong Kong that relates to certain segments. So Belt Road, I see very much exciting. The business community, legal, finance, that makes a lot of sense. Even those involved in construction development. And those segments will wholeheartedly participate and find opportunities. But I think if we're talking about a way to engage young people, I mean, because I've done some research on clustering and so forth, and you know, you have to think of Hong Kong, I think, of the way you think of Paris, or Shanghai, if you want to make a comparison that way, or Tokyo, London, you know, or New York. These are cities that people love for what they are. You know, Hong Kong is a super city. So if you live in New York, you don't have to go anywhere else. You don't have to be excited about projects abroad. If you're interested in that, fine, but people love New York for its feel.
I have an impression that because we talk about this anti-globalization mood, what we're seeing, somehow, I don't know whether I'm right and wrong, somehow I'm feeling that in Hong Kong as well. And, you know, a lot of the problems here is also with the people who are feeling left out as a result of the globalization.
Yes, Hong Kong is putting putting all the eggs into one basket. Well, if Hong Kong needs to be a super connector, as Chief Executive CY Leung says, well, Hong Kong not only needs to connect with mainland China, but also needs to connect with the rest of the world. And over the last 20 years, it seems that we are not doing too much in connecting with the rest of the world. For example, in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, over half of the market capitalization are mainland Chinese companies, and in order to be a super connector, to perform, to perform well in the Belt and Road Initiative, you really need to reach out to do business, with the rest of the world, not just in China.
Yeah. This is again interesting, and I mean the capitalization of the markets here in Hong Kong. A lot of people are saying, look, all of these, so many Chinese companies, mainland companies coming in, just like so many mainland tourists coming in, and mainland people settling in Hong Kong. It's very interesting. I mean, when you have an international city, input makes it richer. If you want to talk about becoming more, diversified. For instance, Switzerland, I was in Geneva for 6 years. 40% of the people are foreigners, and nobody complained that they're not Genevois anymore. They take pride in this. They think
they
because
want to be cosmopolitan.
Because we have 40% foreigners, we're an international city. But I think here, because the Hong Kong people, maybe I'm wrong again, have a psychological barrier against the mainlanders. So when they see more mainlanders coming in, maybe they're not so happy about it. Am I right or wrong?
I think that is as you talk about globalization, there's definitely a backtrack against globalization from other parts of the world. But I don't think that this happens in Hong Kong in a big way. Hong Kong is mainly against this contradictions or the one country, two system. Hong Kong has always been, for a very, very long time, an international city. We welcome so many different nationalities here. You talk about the Indians, they become natives, and other nationalities. So there is there's not the same kind of anti-foreigner feeling.
Anti-mainlanders, maybe.
Anti-mainlander.
Well,
but I think that these contradictions need to be managed in the way we just explained.
Didn't a lot of that also come about from, I mean, coinciding with the Occupy Central movement, which was more of a, in its origins, the Occupy movement, which began on Wall Street and throughout the United States and parts of the Western world, was in its sense anti-elitist, not so much globalization, but this sense of a lack of opportunity. And then it came here, and it took on an anti-mainland feel. But I think coinciding with that, relevant to what you were just discussing, is that you had mainland tourists, eating on MTR trains, urinating in public with their kids, acting badly, and that created friction. Now, I'm not saying all mainlanders did it, of course not, but that became a flashpoint. And part of that relates to simply mainland China is suddenly become a wealthy nation, and you suddenly have people traveling around the world, average people who haven't really been used to, like you, having lived in Geneva for years or had really foreign experience and knowing about adjusting to foreign cultures. It's just been a natural friction point. And I think over time that should go away, but that's been part of the issue. It's just been a natural friction that comes about when one group of people visits that isn't really used to interacting. And here, Hong Kong, yes, it's part of China, but it has its own language in terms of spoken language, and it has its own customs, and that just became a flashpoint. And that's part of growing pains. So a certain amount. Yeah.
Looking ahead, though, we really have to look ahead, right? Not be bound by the frictions in the past. How really can the Chinese mainland and Hong Kong better to communicate with each other, so that more people can be on board when the economy develops overall?
As I said, rather than just talking and stating principles and all that, the more convincing would be the offering of opportunities, the real opportunities. As I said, it doesn't have to be business for the students. If they take the internships that could add credentials to their application for leading universities around the world, they'll go for it. And then, of course, in business, even small businesses could take a part in the One Belt, One Road. And the One Belt, One Road crosses so many different countries, 120 countries around the world. And then this would bring Hong Kong, makes Hong Kong more globalized. And these businesses do not have to be all in Hong Kong, because they are connected. And then the Hong Kong people will have to travel to those countries, and then the people from those countries will travel to Hong Kong. And another thing which could help is for the whole country on the mainland is going out. Now, the going out initiative is now being taken mainly by large state-owned enterprises and large businesses. But for the hundreds and thousands and millions of small and medium-sized businesses, they are going out as well, at least a proportion of them, but they lack the expertise, they lack the confidence, they lack the knowledge, and that's Hong Kong offer. So I can see that if there is a policy-wise, make it easier for some of the small enterprises to find a space in Hong Kong, to a foothold, find their business partnerships, so that they can capitalize on the Great Big Area, and that would increase the kind of integration and capitalize Hong Kong's advantages.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leung. On that note, we have to wrap up this special roundtable discussion on the point Hong Kong connects. And as usual, here is my point. Now, to be a super connector, you have to understand, you have to listen, you have to understand, and you have to cater to the needs of different parties so that you can really serve as a linking point. Now, Hong Kong has always been a point where different worlds can interact and the local people embrace different culture, and I think that should not change, and that should also include mainland China. At the same time, after today's discussion, I think people on the mainland also need to take a second look at how to take Hong Kong more closely to their heart. Maybe that is the key to greater integration between Hong Kong and the rest of China and the rest of the world. That's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time on CGTN.